In a world where justice should be blind, why do some people still see color first? What happens when prejudice meets truth and lies are exposed? Buckle up, because this story will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what happens next. The police sirens wailed like a banshee in the night, their red and blue lights painting the quiet suburban street in chaotic flashes. A crowd had gathered outside a small, unassuming house, their murmurs growing louder as two officers drag a handcuffed black man out of the front door. His name was Marcus Johnson, a 32-year-old mechanic who had lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. His face was a mask of confusion and anger as he shouted, "I didn't do anything. Why are you doing this to me?" Across the street, two women stood with their arms crossed, their faces twisted into smug satisfaction. Karen White, a 45-year-old homemaker with a sharp bob and a sharper tongue, and her best friend, Linda Thompson, a 47-year-old real estate agent with a penchant for drama. They had called the police just 30 minutes earlier, claiming they had witnessed Marcus attempting to assault a young woman in the park. The accusation was shocking, horrifying, and completely false. As Marcus was shoved into the back of the patrol car, Karen turned to Linda and whispered, "That'll teach him to stay in his place." Linda chuckled, but her laughter was cut short when a voice boomed from the crowd. "Wait! Stop!" A young woman pushed her way through the onlookers, her face pale and her hands trembling. It was Emily Carter, a 24-year-old college student who lived just a few blocks away. She was the supposed victim in Karen and Linda's story, but her expression told a different tale. "This is wrong. He didn't do anything to me. Those women are lying." The officers paused, their hands still on the car door. Karen's face turned red with rage as she stepped forward. "Don't listen to her. She's just scared," he threatened her, "and now she's too afraid to tell the truth." Emily shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "No, that's not what happened. I was jogging in the park, and I tripped and fell. Marcus saw me and helped me up. He was kind, and he even offered to call an ambulance. These women saw him helping me and started yelling that he was attacking me. They're the ones who called the police." The crowd erupted into murmurs, their eyes darting between Marcus, Emily, and the two women. Karen and Linda exchanged nervous glances, their confidence wavering. One of the officers, a tall man with a stern face, stepped forward. "Ma'am, is this true? Did you falsely accuse this man?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Linda stepped in, her voice shrill. We thought we saw something. We were just trying to protect her." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You thought? Do you realize the seriousness of what you've done? You've accused an innocent man of a horrific crime based on nothing but your assumptions." Marcus, still handcuffed in the back of the car, leaned forward. "Please, just let me go. I didn't do anything wrong." The officer hesitated, then turned to his partner. "Uncuff him. We need to sort this out." As the officers released Marcus, Karen and Linda began to back away, their faces pale. The crowd's murmurs turned into angry shouts. "Shame on you," someone yelled. "You should be arrested for this." But before anyone could make a move, a new voice cut through the chaos. "What's going on here?" It was Officer Ramirez, a seasoned detective who had just arrived on the scene. He took one look at the situation and immediately sensed that something was off. Someone better start explaining, and it better be the truth. The crowd fell silent as Karen and Linda stammered, trying to come up with an excuse. Marcus stood tall, his eyes locked on the two women who had tried to ruin his life. Emily stood by his side, her face determined. The truth was out, but the fallout was just beginning. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, a loud crash echoed from down the street. Everyone turned to see a car speeding away, its tires screeching against the pavement. Karen and Linda exchanged panicked looks before Linda whispered, "We need to get out of here. Now!" But it was too late. Officer Ramirez stepped in front of them, his hand resting on his belt. "You're not going anywhere. We're going to have a long talk about what just happened." The crowd erupted into cheers as Marcus was finally free, but the story was far from over. Karen and Linda's lies had set off a chain reaction that would change their lives forever. And as the officers led them away, Marcus couldn't help but wonder, What would happen next? What will become of Karen and Linda? Will they face justice for their lies? And how will Marcus recover from this nightmare? Stay tuned because this story is just getting started. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for the next chapter. The police station was a whirlwind of activity. Officers moved back and forth, their voices blending into a low hum of urgency. Marcus sat in a small, dimly lit room, his hands clasped tightly together. The cuffs were off, but the weight of what had just happened still pressed heavily on his shoulders. Across from him sat Officer Ramirez, his expression a mix of sympathy and determination. "Marcus, I need you to walk me through everything that happened tonight," Ramirez said, his voice calm but firm. "Start from the beginning." Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing back to just a few hours earlier. It had been an ordinary evening. He had finished work at the auto shop and decided to take a walk through the park to clear his head. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the trees and the winding paths. He had just reached the edge of the park when he heard a cry. It was Emily. She had been jogging along the path when her foot caught on a tree root, sending her sprawling to the ground. Marcus had rushed over, his instincts kicking in. "Are you okay?" he had asked, kneeling beside her. Emily had looked up, her face twisted in pain. "I think I twisted my ankle," she had said, wincing as she tried to stand. Marcus had helped her up, offering his arm for support. "Do you need me to call someone? An ambulance, maybe?" Emily had shaken her head. "No, I think I'll be okay. Thank you, though. You're really kind." They had exchanged a few more words before Emily insisted she could make it home on her own. Marcus had watched her limp away, making sure she was steady on her feet before turning to leave. It had been a simple act of kindness, one he hadn't thought twice about. But Karen and Linda had seen it differently. As Marcus finished recounting the events, Ramirez leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "So, you were just helping her. You didn't touch her inappropriately or say anything that could be misconstrued?" Marcus shook his head vehemently. "No, sir. I swear. I was just trying to help." Ramirez nodded, jotting down a few notes. "All right. We'll need to get a statement from Emily as well, but your story checks out so far. Those women, though," he trailed off, his expression darkening. "They're in a lot of trouble." Meanwhile, in another room, Karen and Linda sat side by side, their earlier confidence completely shattered. They had been separated from each other, each sitting in their own interrogation room. Karen fidgeted nervously, her mind racing as she tried to come up with a way to explain herself. The door opened, and a stern-faced detective walked in. "Ms. White, I'm Detective Harris. I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight, and I suggest you be honest." Karen swallowed hard, her mouth dry. I thought I saw something. I thought he was hurting her. I was just trying to help." Detective Harris raised an eyebrow. "You thought? Did you actually see him assault her? Or did you just assume?" Karen hesitated, her mind scrambling for an answer. I don't know. It all happened so fast." Detective Harris leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Ms. White, do you realize the gravity of what you've done? You accused an innocent man of a serious crime based on nothing but your own assumptions. That's not just wrong. It's dangerous." Karen's hands trembled as she clasped them together. "I didn't mean to. But her words trailed off as the weight of her actions began to sink in. She had been so sure of herself, so convinced that she was doing the right thing. But now, faced with the reality of what she had done, she felt a cold dread creeping over her. In the next room, Linda was having a similar experience. She sat across from another detective, her face pale and her hands shaking. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought we were helping." The detective sighed, shaking his head. "Miss Thompson, you and your friend have caused a lot of trouble tonight. Not just for Mr. Johnson, but for yourselves as well. False accusations are a serious matter, and there will be consequences." Linda's heart sank as the words hit her. She had always prided herself on being a good person, someone who stood up for what was right. But now, she realized she had done the exact opposite. Back in the waiting area, Marcus sat quietly, his mind still reeling from the night's events. He couldn't believe how quickly things had spiraled out of control. One moment, he had been helping someone in need, The next, he was being dragged away in handcuffs, accused of a crime he would never commit. But as he sat there, a small glimmer of hope began to grow. Emily had stood up for him, telling the truth even when it was difficult. The officers had listened, and now Karen and Linda were facing the consequences of their actions. Maybe, just maybe, justice would prevail. But as the night wore on, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Karen and Linda's lies had set something in motion, something that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. And then, just as he was beginning to relax, the door to the waiting room burst open. A young officer rushed in, his face pale and his eyes wide. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice urgent. "Karen White and Linda Thompson, they're gone." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean they're gone?" The officer shook his head, his expression grim. "They slipped out while we were processing their statements. We've got officers looking for them, but they're in the wind." Marcus felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his chest. If Karen and Linda were willing to lie about something so serious, what else were they capable of? And now, with the police searching for them, who knew what they might do next? The night was far from over, and the stakes had just gotten even higher. The police station erupted into chaos. Officers scrambled, radios crackling with urgent updates as the search for Karen and Linda intensified. Marcus sat frozen in the waiting room, his mind racing. The idea that the two women had fled sent a chill down his spine. What were they planning? Were they running because they were scared of facing the consequences? Or was there something more sinister at play? Detective Ramirez stormed into the room, his face tight with frustration. "Marcus, we need to get you out of here. It's not safe. If those women are desperate enough to run, there's no telling what they might do next." Marcus stood, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. "Where am I supposed to go? They know where I live. They know everything about me." Ramirez hesitated, then nodded. "We'll put you in protective custody for now, just until we find them. You'll be safe, I promise." Marcus didn't argue. He followed Ramirez out of the station, his mind still spinning. As they stepped into the cool night air, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see Karen or Linda lurking in the shadows, but the street was empty. The drive to the safe house was tense and silent. Marcus stared out the window, his thoughts a jumbled mess. He thought about Emily, the young woman who had stood up for him when no one else would. He thought about Karen and Linda, their smug faces as they lied to the police. And he thought about his own life, how it had been turned upside down in just a few short hours. When they arrived at the safe house, Ramirez handed him a key and a phone. "This is a burner. My number's already programmed in. If you see or hear anything suspicious, call me immediately. Don't take any chances." Marcus nodded, clutching the phone tightly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For believing me." Ramirez gave him a grim smile. "It's my job. Now get some rest. We'll find them, Marcus. I promise." As Ramirez drove away, Marcus stepped inside the small, nondescript house. It was sparsely furnished, but it was clean and secure. He locked the door behind him and sank onto the couch, his body finally giving in to the exhaustion that had been building all night. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every sound from outside, made him jump. He kept replaying the events of the night in his mind, wondering how things could have gone so wrong. And as the hours dragged on, he couldn't shake the feeling that something even worse was coming. Meanwhile, Karen and Linda were on the run. They had slipped out of the police station during the chaos, using the confusion to their advantage. Now, they were holed up in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, their nerves frayed and their tempers short. "This is all your fault," Karen snapped, pacing the small room. "If you hadn't opened your big mouth, we wouldn't be in this mess." Linda glared at her from the bed. "My fault? You're the one who started yelling about him attacking her. I was just backing you up." Karen stopped pacing, her face red with anger. "Well, now what? We can't go home. The police are looking for us. We're ruined." Linda sighed, running a hand through her hair. "We need to figure out a plan. We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us." Karen sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumping. "What kind of plan? We're trapped. There's no way out of this. Linda was silent for a moment, her mind racing. Then, a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. Maybe there is. If we can't prove we were right, maybe we can make sure no one believes him. Karen frowned. What are you talking about? Linda leaned closer, her voice low. We need to discredit him. Make him look like the bad guy. If we can convince people that he's dangerous, they'll forget about us. Karen's eyes widened. How are we supposed to do that? Linda's smile turned cold. We'll make it look like he's threatening us. If we can get him to react, to do something stupid, we can turn this around. Karen hesitated, but the desperation in her eyes was clear. Do you really think it'll work? Linda nodded. It has to. We don't have any other choice. Back at the safe house, Marcus was finally drifting off to sleep when his phone buzzed loudly on the table. He jolted awake, his heart pounding as he grabbed it. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. You think you've won, but this isn't over. We're coming for you. Marcus stared at the message, his blood running cold. He quickly dialed Ramirez's number, his hands shaking. Ramirez, it's Marcus. I just got a threat. They're coming for me. Ramirez's voice was sharp. What did it say? Who sent it? Marcus read the message aloud, his voice trembling. I don't know who sent it, but it has to be them. Karen and Linda. They're not done. Ramirez cursed under his breath. Stay where you are. I'm sending backup. Don't open the door for anyone. You hear me? Anyone. Marcus nodded, even though Ramirez couldn't see him. I won't. Just hurry. As he hung up the phone, Marcus felt a wave of fear wash over him. He had thought the worst was over, but now he realized it was just beginning. Karen and Linda were desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the drawer and sat by the door, his eyes fixed on the window. The night was quiet, but he knew that could change in an instant. And as he waited, he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Outside, the shadows shifted. Two figures moved silently through the darkness, their eyes fixed on the safe house. Karen and Linda had found him, and they weren't leaving without finishing what they started. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. The safe house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every breath feel too loud. Marcus sat by the door, the kitchen knife clutched tightly in his hand. His eyes darted to the window every few seconds, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The threat on his phone had shaken him to his core, and now every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, felt like a warning. Minutes felt like hours as he waited for Ramirez and backup to arrive. His mind raced with possibilities. What if Karen and Linda were already outside? What if they had weapons? What if they were planning something worse than he could imagine? A sudden knock on the door made him jump, his heart slamming against his ribs. He froze, his grip tightening on the knife. Who is it? He called out, his voice trembling. Marcus, it's me, Ramirez. Open up. Relief flooded through him, but he hesitated. How do I know it's really you? There was a pause. Then Ramirez's voice came again, calm but firm. Marcus, it's me. I'm here with 2 officers. We're going to get you out of here, but you need to open the door. Marcus took a deep breath and slowly unlocked the door, peeking out to confirm it was really Ramirez. When he saw the detective's familiar face, he finally let himself relax. They're out there, he said quickly, stepping aside to let them in. Karen and Linda. They sent me a threat. They're coming for me. Ramirez nodded, his expression grim. We know. We've got units searching the area, but we need to move you to a more secure location. Grab whatever you need. We're leaving now? Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket and the burner phone, then followed Ramirez and the 2 officers out to a waiting patrol car. As they drove away from the safe house, Marcus couldn't help but glance back, half expecting to see Karen and Linda chasing after them. Meanwhile, Karen and Linda watched from the shadows as the police car disappeared down the street. They had been close, too close, but the arrival of backup had forced them to retreat. Now, they were back in their motel room, their frustration boiling over. This isn't working, Karen snapped, pacing the room. We're never going to get to him if the police are always one step ahead. Linda sat on the edge of the bed, her face twisted in thought. We need to change our approach. If we can't get to him directly, maybe we can hit him where it hurts. Karen stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean? Linda's lips curled into a sly smile. We go after his reputation. If we can make everyone believe he's dangerous, no one will trust him. We'll ruin his life without ever laying a finger on him. Karen's eyes lit up with a mix of relief and malice. How do we do that? Linda leaned forward, her voice low. We spread the word. Social media, neighborhood groups, anywhere people will listen. We'll say he's been harassing us, threatening us. We'll make him look like a monster. Karen nodded slowly, a cruel smile spreading across her face. And once everyone turns against him, the police won't have any reason to protect him. He'll be all alone. Exactly, Linda said, her smile widening. And when he's at his weakest, we'll strike. The next morning, Marcus woke up in a new safe house, this one even more secure than the last. Ramirez had assured him that Karen and Linda wouldn't be able to find him here, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He grabbed the burner phone and checked for messages, half expecting another threat, but the screen was blank. He decided to check social media, hoping for some distraction, but what he found made his blood run cold. His name was trending, and not in a good way. Dozens of posts accused him of harassment, stalking, and even violence. The posts were anonymous, but the descriptions were detailed enough to make them seem credible. Marcus Johnson is dangerous. He's been threatening innocent women in our neighborhood. Stay away from him. I saw him following me last night. I'm scared for my safety. Please share this so everyone knows. The police are protecting him, but we need to protect ourselves. Spread the word. Marcus's hands shook as he scrolled through the posts, his heart sinking with each one. The comments were even worse, with people calling for his arrest and even suggesting vigilante justice. He felt sick to his stomach. Karen and Linda were ruining his life without even being near him. He quickly called Ramirez, his voice frantic. They're lying about me online. They're making me look like a monster. You have to do something. Ramirez's voice was calm, but firm. I've already seen the posts. We're working on tracking down the accounts, but it's going to take time. In the meantime, stay off social media. Don't engage with anyone. We'll handle this. Marcus hung up, feeling more helpless than ever. He had always tried to live a quiet, honest life, and now was being torn apart by lies. He thought about Emily, the one person who had stood up for him, and wondered if she had seen the posts. Would she still believe him, or would she start to doubt him too? As the day wore on, the posts continued to spread, gaining traction with every share. Karen and Linda watched from their motel room, their spirits lifting as they saw their plan working. People were turning against Marcus, just as they had hoped. But their victory was short-lived. As they scrolled through the comments, they came across a post that made their blood run cold. I know who's behind this. Karen White and Linda Thompson, you're not as clever as you think. The truth is coming out, and you're not going to like it. The post was from an anonymous account, but the tone was confident, almost threatening. Karen and Linda exchanged nervous glances, their earlier triumph fading. Who is that? Karen asked, her voice trembling. How do they know our names? Linda shook her head, her face pale. I don't know, but we need to find out. If someone's onto us, we're in even bigger trouble than we thought. That night, Marcus sat alone in the safe house, his mind racing. The online attacks had shaken him, but the anonymous post defending him gave him a glimmer of hope. Someone out there knew the truth, and they were fighting back. But as he stared out the window, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Karen and Linda were desperate, and desperate people were capable of anything. The battle for his life and reputation was far from over, and the next move could change everything. The shadows outside seemed to shift, and Marcus tightened his grip on the knife. He wasn't going down without a fight. The anonymous post defending Marcus spread like wildfire. By morning, it had been shared hundreds of times, and the comment section was a battleground. Some people were skeptical, demanding proof, while others were starting to question the accusations against Marcus. The tide was turning, but not fast enough. Marcus sat in the safe house, his eyes glued to the burner phone as he refreshed the post every few minutes. The anonymous account hadn't posted anything else, and he couldn't help but wonder who was behind it. Was it Emily? Someone else who had witnessed what happened in the park? Or was it just a random person who had seen through Karen and Linda's lies? He wanted to reach out to thank whoever it was, but Ramirez had warned him not to engage. Stay off social media, the detective had said. Let us handle this. But it was hard to sit back and do nothing while his life was being torn apart. Meanwhile, Karen and Linda were in a panic. The anonymous post had thrown a wrench into their plan, and they were scrambling to figure out their next move. They sat in their motel room, the curtains drawn, their faces pale with fear. Who could it be? Karen asked, pacing the room. Who knows about us? Linda shook her head, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the comments. I don't know, but we need to shut this down before it gets worse. If people start believing him, we're finished. Karen stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. We need to discredit the post. Make it look like Marcus is behind it, trying to cover his tracks. Linda frowned. How? We don't even know who's posting it. Karen's lips curled into a sly smile. We don't need to know who it is. We just need to make people think it's him. We'll create another account, post something that makes him look guilty, and then link it back to the anonymous post. If we can make it look like he's manipulating the narrative, no one will believe him. Linda's eyes lit up with a mix of relief and malice. That could work, but we need to be careful. If the police trace it back to us, Karen waved her hand dismissively. We'll use a VPN or something. They won't be able to trace it. Within hours, a new post appeared on social media. It was from another anonymous account, but this one was accusing Marcus of creating the original post to cover up his crimes. Don't be fooled by Marcus Johnson's lies. He's using fake accounts to manipulate the truth. He's dangerous, and he's trying to silence his victims. Share this so everyone knows the real story. The post was accompanied by a blurry photo of Marcus, taken from a distance with a caption that read, "Caught in the act." Marcus Johnson is not who he claims to be. The comments section exploded with outrage. People who had been on the fence were now firmly against Marcus, and even some of his defenders were starting to doubt him. Marcus saw the new post and felt his heart sink. He had been so close to clearing his name, and now it felt like he was back at square one. He called Ramirez, his voice desperate. They're lying again. They're making it look like I'm behind the post defending me. You have to stop them. Ramirez's voice was calm, but firm. We're working on it, Marcus. We've got tech experts tracing the accounts, but it's going to take time. In the meantime, stay off social media. Don't engage with anyone. We'll handle this. Marcus hung up, feeling more helpless than ever. He wanted to fight back, to tell his side of the story, but he knew it would only make things worse. He was trapped, and there was nothing he could do but wait. That evening, Emily sat in her apartment, her laptop open in front of her. She had seen the posts accusing Marcus, and her heart ached for him. She knew the truth, and she couldn't stand by and watch him be destroyed by lies. She opened a new browser window and created an anonymous account. She didn't know if it would help, but she had to try. She typed out a post, her fingers flying over the keyboard. I was there that night in the park. I'm the woman Marcus Johnson helped. He didn't assault me. He didn't threaten me. He was kind and caring, and he saved me from a bad fall. Karen White and Linda Thompson are lying. They accused him of a crime he didn't commit, and now they're trying to ruin his life. Don't believe their lies. The truth will come out. She hesitated for a moment, then hit post. The message went live, and within minutes, it started gaining traction. People were sharing it, commenting on it, and demanding answers. Emily sat back, her heart pounding. She didn't know if it would be enough, but she had done what she could. Now, all she could do was wait and hope that the truth would prevail. Karen and Linda saw Emily's post and felt a cold dread creeping over them. They had been so close to winning, but now their lies were unraveling. People were starting to question their story, and the pressure was mounting. We need to do something, Karen said, her voice trembling. If people start believing her, we're finished. Linda nodded, her face pale. We need to discredit her. Make it look like she's lying, or that she's working with Marcus. Karen's eyes lit up with a cruel idea. What if we say she's his girlfriend? That she's covering for him because she's in love with him? Linda smiled, her confidence returning. That could work. If we can make her look biased, no one will believe her. They quickly created another post, This one accusing Emily of being Marcus's accomplice. Don't be fooled by Emily Carter. She's Marcus Johnson's girlfriend, and she's lying to protect him. They're in this together. Share this so everyone knows the truth. The post was accompanied by a fake screenshot of a text conversation between Marcus and Emily, with messages that made it look like they were conspiring to cover up the truth. Emily saw the post and felt a wave of anger and frustration. She had tried to help, and now she was being dragged into the mess. She called Ramirez, her voice shaking with emotion. They're lying about me now. They're saying I'm Marcus's girlfriend, that I'm covering for him. You have to stop them. Ramirez's voice was calm, but firm. We're working on it, Emily. We've got tech experts tracing the accounts, and we're close to identifying who's behind them. In the meantime, stay off social media. Don't engage with anyone. We'll handle this. Emily hung up, feeling more helpless than ever. She had tried to do the right thing, and now she was paying the price. She thought about Marcus, alone in the safe house, and wondered if they would ever be able to clear their names. As the night wore on, the battle online continued to rage. The posts accusing Marcus and Emily were gaining traction, but so were the posts defending them. The truth was fighting back, but it was a slow and painful process. Marcus sat in the safe house, his mind racing. He thought about Emily, about how she had risked everything to stand up for him, and he felt a surge of gratitude. He didn't know if they would ever be able to clear their names, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going down without a fight. The shadows outside seemed to shift, and Marcus tightened his grip on the knife. The battle for his life and reputation was far from over, and the next move could change everything. The online war raged on, but the real battle was just beginning. Marcus and Emily were caught in the crossfire of Karen and Linda's lies, and the stakes were higher than ever. The safe house felt like a prison, and Marcus was growing restless. He couldn't just sit there while his life was being destroyed. He needed to do something, anything to fight back. Ramirez had warned him to stay put, but Marcus was done waiting. He grabbed his jacket and the burner phone, then slipped out the back door. The night was cool and quiet, the streets empty as he made his way to Emily's apartment. He didn't know if she would even want to see him, but he had to try. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. Emily was sitting on her couch, her laptop open in front of her, when she heard a soft knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone, and after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure she wanted to answer. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw Marcus standing there, his face pale and his eyes filled with desperation. She hesitated for a moment, then unlocked the door and let him in. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're supposed to be in protective custody." Marcus stepped inside, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I couldn't just sit there anymore. I had to see you. I had to know if you were okay." Emily closed the door behind him, her mind racing. "I'm fine, but you shouldn't be here. If Karen and Linda find out." "Karen and Linda are the reason I'm here," Marcus interrupted, his voice tight with anger. "They're lying about both of us, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. We need to fight back. Emily. Together." Emily stared at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, to trust that they could win this, but the fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of her mind. "How? They've already turned everyone against us. What can we do?" Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto hers. "We tell the truth. All of it. We go to the police, we go to the media, we do whatever it takes to make people see what's really going on. We can't let them win." Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but we need to be careful. If they find out we're working together, they'll just come after us harder." Marcus reached out and took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "We'll be careful, but we can't do this alone. We need each other." Meanwhile, Karen and Linda were holed up in their motel room, their nerves frayed and their tempers short. The online battle was taking its toll, and they were starting to feel the pressure. The anonymous posts defending Marcus and Emily were gaining traction, and people were starting to question their story. "We need to do something," Karen said, pacing the room. "If people start believing them, we're finished." Linda sat on the edge of the bed, her face twisted in thought. We need to escalate. If we can't win online, we'll take it offline. We'll make sure no one ever believes them again. Karen stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? Linda's lips curled into a sly smile. We'll stage something big, something that will make everyone see Marcus for the monster he really is. Karen's eyes lit up with a mix of relief and malice. What do you have in mind? Linda leaned closer, her voice low. We'll make it look like he attacked us. We'll call the police, say he broke in and try to hurt us. If we can make it look real, no one will ever believe him again. Karen hesitated, but the desperation in her eyes was clear. Do you really think it'll work? Linda nodded. It has to. We don't have any other choice. That night, Karen and Linda put their plan into action. They waited until the streets were quiet, then drove to Marcus's neighborhood. They parked a few blocks away and crept through the shadows, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. When they reached Marcus's house, they broke a window and slipped inside. They trashed the place, overturning furniture, smashing dishes, and spray-painting threatening messages on the walls. Then, they called the police, their voices trembling with fake fear. Help! He's here! He's trying to kill us! Karen screamed into the phone. Please hurry! The dispatcher promised to send help, and Karen and Linda waited, their nerves on edge. They knew the police would be there soon, and they had to make it look real. Marcus and Emily were sitting in her apartment, trying to come up with a plan, when Marcus's burner phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Ramirez. Marcus, where are you? Your house has been broken into. Karen and Linda are there, and they're accusing you of attacking them. Get back to the safe house now. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He showed the message to Emily, his face pale. They're at my house. They're saying I attacked them. Emily's eyes widened in fear. What do we do? Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing. We go to the police. We tell them everything. We can't let them get away with this. Emily nodded, her determination matching his. Let's go. They arrived at the police station just as Karen and Linda were being escorted inside. The two women were crying and shaking, their faces pale with fake fear. They pointed at Marcus as soon as they saw him, their voices shrill. He's here. He's the one who attacked us. Karen screamed. Please arrest him. The officers hesitated, their eyes darting between Marcus and the two women. Ramirez stepped forward, his expression grim. Everyone calm down. We're going to sort this out, but we need to hear both sides. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. I didn't attack them. They're lying. They broke into my house and trashed it, and now they're trying to frame me. Karen and Linda shook their heads, their tears flowing freely. He's lying. He's dangerous. Please, you have to believe us. Ramirez held up a hand, silencing them. We'll investigate this thoroughly. In the meantime, everyone needs to stay calm. As the officers led Karen and Linda away for questioning, Marcus and Emily sat down to give their statements. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. They were fighting back, and they weren't alone. But as he glanced at Karen and Linda, their faces twisted with fake fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The stakes had never been higher, and the next move could change everything. The police station was a whirlwind of activity. Officers moved back and forth, their voices blending into a low hum of urgency. Marcus and Emily sat in a small, dimly lit room, giving their statements to Ramirez. The detective's face was a mask of concentration as he listened, jotting down notes and occasionally asking questions to clarify details. Meanwhile, Karen and Linda were in separate interrogation rooms, their stories being scrutinized by other officers. The two women had stuck to their plan, crying and shaking as they accused Marcus of breaking into his own house and attacking them. But their lies were starting to unravel. In Karen's interrogation room, Detective Harris leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Ms. White, you're saying Marcus Johnson broke into his own house, trashed it, and then attacked you. Is that correct? Karen nodded, her face pale and her hands trembling. Yes. He's dangerous. He's been threatening us for days. Harris raised an eyebrow. And yet, you didn't report these threats to the police until tonight. Why is that? Karen hesitated, her mind racing for an answer. We were scared. We didn't think anyone would believe us. Harris leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. Ms. White, we've been investigating Marcus Johnson for days. We've seen the social media posts, the accusations, the threats. And now, we have evidence that suggests you and Ms. Thompson may have been the ones behind all of it. Karen's eyes widened in panic. What evidence? We didn't do anything. Harris slid a folder across the table, opening it to reveal a series of screenshots and IP addresses. We've traced the anonymous accounts back to your motel room. The posts accusing Marcus, the fake text conversations, the threats, they all came from you. Karen's face turned red with anger and fear. That's not possible. Someone must have hacked us. Harris shook his head, his voice calm but firm. We've also reviewed the security footage from Marcus's neighborhood. It shows you and Ms. Thompson breaking into his house, not the other way around. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She had been so sure of her plan, so confident that she could outsmart the police. But now, faced with the cold, hard truth, she felt a wave of dread crashing over her. In Linda's interrogation room, the scene was much the same. Detective Martinez sat across from her, her expression stern. Ms. Thompson, you're accusing Marcus Johnson of attacking you, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Can you explain that? Linda shook her head, her face pale and her hands trembling. I don't know what you're talking about. He's the one who attacked us? Martinez slid a folder across the table, opening it to reveal the same screenshots and IP addresses. We've traced the anonymous accounts back to your motel room. The posts accusing Marcus, the fake text conversations, the threats, they all came from you. Linda's eyes widened in panic. That's not true. Someone must have framed us? Martinez leaned forward, her voice low and steady. We've also reviewed the security footage from Marcus's neighborhood. It shows you and Ms. White breaking into his house, not the other way around. Linda's face turned red with anger and fear. She had always prided herself on being clever, on being able to manipulate situations to her advantage. But now, faced with the undeniable truth, she felt a cold dread creeping over her. Back in the waiting area, Marcus and Emily sat side by side, their hands clasped tightly together. They had given their statements, and now they were waiting to see what would happen next. The tension in the air was palpable, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Do you think they'll believe us? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, his eyes locked on the door. They have to. The evidence is on our side. But as the minutes dragged on, the doubt began to creep in. What if Karen and Linda found a way to twist the truth? What if the police didn't believe them? What if they were never able to clear their names? Finally, the door opened, and Ramirez stepped into the room. His face was grim, but there was a hint of relief in his eyes. We've got them, he said, his voice steady. Karen and Linda have confessed. They admitted to fabricating the accusations, creating the fake accounts, and breaking into your house. They're going to be charged with filing false police reports, defamation, and breaking and entering. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of anger. They ruined my life, he said, his voice trembling. They tried to destroy me. Ramirez nodded, his expression sympathetic. I know, and they're going to pay for what they've done. But for now, you need to focus on moving forward. You got your life back, Marcus. Don't let them take anything else from you. Emily squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with tears. We'll get through this. Together. Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had been through hell, but he wasn't alone. Emily had stood by him, and now, finally, the truth had come out. As they left the police station, the night air felt different, lighter, freer. The weight of the accusations had been lifted, and for the first time in days, Marcus felt like he could breathe again. But as he glanced at Emily, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't entirely over. Karen and Linda had been caught, but the damage they had done would take time to repair. The online posts were still out there, and some people would always believe the lies. But Marcus knew that as long as he had the truth, and Emily by his side, he could face whatever came next. The The shadows outside seemed less threatening now, but Marcus knew better than to let his guard down completely. The fight for his life and reputation had been brutal, but it had also shown him who he could trust. And as they walked into the night, he felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The worst was behind them, but the journey to rebuild their lives was just beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Marcus and Emily. With Karen and Linda in custody, the immediate threat was over, but the aftermath of their lies lingered like a dark cloud. The online posts accusing Marcus were still circulating, and while some people had started to question the validity of the accusations, others remained convinced of his guilt. The damage to his reputation wasn't something that could be undone overnight. Marcus spent the first few days after the arrest laying low, staying with Emily at her apartment. He was grateful for her support, but he couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. He wanted to clear his name completely, to make sure no one ever doubted him again. But how? One morning, as they sat at Emily's kitchen table sipping coffee, Marcus broke the silence. "We need to do something," he said, his voice firm. "I can't just sit here and wait for people to forget. I need to take control of the narrative." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I agree. But what can we do? The police have already put out a statement saying Karen and Linda confessed, but not everyone's seen it." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with an idea. "What if we tell our story? Not just to the police, but to everyone. We could do an interview, go on the news, something like that. If people hear the truth directly from us, maybe they'll finally believe it." Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It's risky. People might still doubt us, especially if Karen and Linda's supporters try to twist things. But I think it's worth a shot. We can't let them control the story anymore." That afternoon, they reached out to a local news station. The producer they spoke to was intrigued by their story and agreed to set up an interview. It was scheduled for the next day, and Marcus and Emily spent the rest of the evening preparing. They knew they had to be careful with their words to make sure their message was clear and undeniable. The following morning, they arrived at the news station, their nerves on edge. The studio was bustling with activity, and they were quickly ushered into a small room to meet the reporter who would be conducting the interview. Her name was Sarah Collins, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for fairness and integrity. "Thank you for coming in," Sarah said, shaking their hands. "I've read the police reports, and I've seen the social media posts. This is a complicated story, but I want to make sure we get it right. Are you ready?" Marcus and Emily exchanged a glance, then nodded. "We're ready," Marcus said. The interview began with Sarah asking them to recount the events of that night in the park. Marcus spoke first, his voice steady as he described how he had seen Emily fall and rushed to help her. Emily followed, her voice trembling slightly as she explained how Karen and Linda had misinterpreted the situation and accused Marcus of assault. Sarah listened intently, occasionally asking follow-up questions to clarify details. Then, she shifted the focus to the aftermath. "Marcus, you were arrested based on these false accusations. How did that feel?" Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes dark with emotion. "It was terrifying. I've always tried to live an honest life, to treat people with respect. To have that taken away from me, to have people believe I was capable of something so horrible, it was devastating." Emily reached over and took his hand, her eyes filled with tears. "And it wasn't just Marcus who suffered. I was dragged into it too. They accused me of lying, of being his accomplice. It felt like no matter what we did, they were always one step ahead." Sarah nodded, her expression sympathetic. "And now that Karen and Linda have confessed, how are you both feeling?" Marcus glanced at Emily, then back at Sarah. "Relieved, but it's not over. The lies they spread are still out there. People still believe them. We just want the truth to be known, for everyone to see what really happened." The interview aired that evening, and the response was immediate. Social media lit up with reactions, some supportive, others skeptical. But for the first time, the tide seemed to be turning in Marcus and Emily's favor. People were starting to question the accusations, to see Karen and Linda for who they really were. Meanwhile, Karen and Linda sat in their jail cells, their confidence shattered. They had been so sure of their plan, so confident that they could outsmart everyone. But now, faced with the consequences of their actions, They felt a cold dread creeping over them. Karen stared at the wall of her cell, her mind racing. She had always thought of herself as clever, as someone who could manipulate situations to her advantage. But now, she realized she had been playing a dangerous game, and she had lost. Linda sat in her own cell, her face pale and her hands trembling. She had always followed Karen's lead, trusting that her friend knew what she was doing. But now, she felt a wave of regret crashing over her. They had ruined lives, including their own, and there was no way to undo the damage. As the days passed, the public's opinion continued to shift. More and more people came forward to support Marcus and Emily, sharing their own stories of how Karen and Linda had manipulated and lied. The truth was finally coming to light, and the two women were facing the consequences of their actions. But for Marcus and Emily, the battle wasn't entirely over. The scars left by the accusations would take time to heal, and they knew they would always have to be vigilant. But for the first time in weeks, they felt a glimmer of hope. As they sat together on Emily's couch, watching the news coverage of their interview, Marcus turned to her and smiled. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We told our story." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "And people are finally listening." The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they knew they could face it together. The worst was behind them, and the future was theirs to reclaim. The weeks that followed the interview were a mix of relief and lingering unease for Marcus and Emily. While the public tide had turned in their favor, the scars of the ordeal were still fresh. Marcus's name was no longer trending for the wrong reasons, but the damage to his reputation wasn't something that could be erased overnight. People still whispered, still cast sideways glances when he walked into a room. Emily, too, felt the weight of the accusations, though she tried to stay strong for Marcus. One evening, as they sat on Emily's couch, Marcus broke the silence. "I think it's time for me to go back to work," he said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "I can't keep hiding. I need to start rebuilding my life." Emily nodded, her expression supportive but cautious. "I get that, but are you sure you're ready? People might still be difficult." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but I can't let them win. If I don't go back now, I might never go back. And I can't let Karen and Linda take that from me, too." Emily reached over and squeezed his hand. "Then I'll be there with you, every step of the way." The next morning, Marcus returned to the auto shop where he worked. His boss, Greg, had been supportive throughout the ordeal, but Marcus could see the hesitation in his eyes as he walked in. The other mechanics paused, their tools going silent as they turned to look at him. "Marcus," Greg said, stepping forward. "Good to have you back." Marcus nodded, forcing a smile. "Thanks, Greg. It's good to be back." The day was awkward at first. The other mechanics kept their distance, their conversations hushed and stilted. But as the hours passed, some of them began to warm up. One by one, they approached Marcus, offering words of support and encouragement. "Man, I'm sorry you had to go through that," one of the mechanics, Jake, said as they worked side by side on a car. "Those women, they're monsters. I'm glad they're locked up." Marcus nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thanks, Jake. That means a lot." By the end of the day, Marcus felt a small sense of normalcy returning. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Karen and Linda were facing their own struggles. Their trial date was fast approaching, and the weight of their actions was beginning to crush them. They sat in their jail cells, their once confident demeanors replaced by fear and regret. Karen stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had always thought of herself as untouchable, as someone who could manipulate situations to her advantage. But now, faced with the reality of prison time, she felt a cold dread creeping over her. Linda sat in her own cell, her face pale and her hands trembling. She had always followed Karen's lead, trusting that her friend knew what she was doing. But now, she felt a wave of regret crashing over her. They had ruined lives, including their own, and there was no way to undo the damage. As the trial began, Marcus and Emily sat in the courtroom, their hands clasped tightly together. The prosecution laid out the case against Karen and Linda, presenting the evidence of their lies and manipulation. The defense tried to argue that the women had acted out of fear and misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. When it was Marcus's turn to take the stand, he felt a surge of nerves. But as he looked out at the courtroom, he saw Emily sitting in the front row, her eyes filled with encouragement. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice steady and clear. He recounted the events of that night in the park, the kindness he had shown Emily, and the horror of being falsely accused. He spoke about the impact the accusations had on his life, the fear and isolation he had felt. And he ended with a simple statement: "I just want the truth to be known. I want people to see what really happened." Emily followed him to the stand, her voice trembling but strong as she told her side of the story. She described the fear she had felt when Karen and Linda accused Marcus, the guilt of knowing that her silence had allowed the lies to spread. And she ended with a plea for justice. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity, but in the end, the verdict was clear. Karen and Linda were found guilty on all charges: filing false police reports, defamation, and breaking and entering. The judge sentenced them to several years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving a significant portion of their sentences. As the gavel came down, Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't just the verdict. It was the knowledge that the truth had finally prevailed. He turned to Emily, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's over." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "It's over." But as they left the courtroom, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't entirely over. The scars left by the accusations would take time to heal, and they knew they would always have to be vigilant. But for the first time in months, they felt a glimmer of hope. As they walked into the sunlight, Marcus turned to Emily and smiled. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "for standing by me, for believing in me." Emily smiled back, her eyes filled with love. "Always." The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they knew they could face it together. The worst was behind them, and the future was theirs to reclaim. The months that followed the trial were a time of healing and rebuilding for Marcus and Emily. The public's perception of Marcus had shifted dramatically, thanks in large part to the news interview and the trial's outcome. People who had once doubted him now saw him as a victim of a cruel and calculated scheme. The auto shop where Marcus worked became a place of support, with customers and co-workers alike going out of their way to show their solidarity. But the scars of the ordeal ran deep. Marcus still found himself looking over his shoulder, his trust in others shaken. Emily, too, struggled with the lingering effects of the accusations. They leaned on each other, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as they sat on the porch of Marcus's newly rented house, Emily broke the silence. "Do you ever think about what happened? Really think about it?" Marcus sighed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "All the time. It's hard not to, but I try to focus on the fact that we made it through, that we're still here, still together." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. I can't believe how close we came to losing everything." If Karen and Linda had gotten away with it, Marcus reached over and took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "But they didn't, and we're stronger because of it. We've got each other, and we've got the truth on our side." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you, Marcus. I don't know what I would have done without you." Marcus smiled back, his heart swelling with emotion. "I love you too, Emily. More than anything." As the weeks turned into months, Marcus and Emily began to rebuild their lives. Marcus threw himself into his work, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of the auto shop. He even started mentoring a young apprentice, teaching him the skills he had spent years perfecting. It felt good to give back, to help someone else find their way. Emily, too, found a sense of purpose. She started volunteering at a local community center, helping victims of abuse and harassment navigate the legal system. Her own experience had given her a unique perspective, and she was determined to use it to make a difference. One day, as Marcus was working on a car, his phone buzzed with a notification. He wiped his hands on a rag and pulled it out, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the headline: "Karen White and Linda Thompson denied parole." He quickly scanned the article, his eyes widening as he read the details. The parole board had reviewed their case and decided that they had not shown sufficient remorse for their actions. They would remain in prison for the foreseeable future. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had known that Karen and Linda were behind bars, but the possibility of their early release had always loomed in the back of his mind. Now, that fear was gone. He called Emily, his voice filled with emotion. "Did you see the news?" Emily's voice was soft but steady. "I did. It's over, Marcus. Really over." Marcus nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, it's over." That evening, Marcus and Emily celebrated with a quiet dinner at home. They talked about the future, about the dreams they had put on hold during the ordeal. Marcus mentioned the possibility of opening his own auto shop someday, while Emily talked about going back to school to study law. As they sat together, their hands clasped tightly, Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were facing it together, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, the sun just beginning to peek through the curtains. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Emily, and made his way to the kitchen. As he brewed a pot of coffee, he thought about everything they had been through. The fear, the anger, the pain, it had all been worth it because it had brought them to this moment. Emily joined him a few minutes later, her hair tousled and her eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," she said, her voice soft. Marcus smiled, handing her a cup of coffee. "Morning. I was just thinking, we've come a long way, haven't we?" Emily nodded, her eyes filled with love. "We have, and we got a long way to go, but we'll get there. Together." Marcus reached over and took her hand, his heart swelling with gratitude. Together, as they sat there, the sun streaming through the windows, Marcus felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The worst was behind them, and the future was bright. They had faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. And as they looked ahead, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.